Okay.
That's it started, convener.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, welcome everybody to the Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee. Please note that the public session of the meeting will be recorded and published online for public access after the meeting. Can all attendees please switch off their camera and mute their microphone when not speaking? The camera and microphone should only be switched on when you are invited to speak. Guidance on how to do this is contained within the guidance which has previously been issued to you, but I think we've all kind of hopefully got the hang of it by now. So moving on, urgent business, there isn't any. Exempt business, there is none. Item 3, declarations of interest. Has anyone got any declarations of interest? Not seeing anyone. Oh, Councillor Duncan.
Yes, thanks, convener. I'd like to declare an interest at item 8.1. I'm a board member of Aberdeen Performing Arts, but the nature of my interest means that I don't have to leave this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Declaration of interest? Councillor Mackenzie. Thank you.
The same applies to me as Councillor Duncan. I don't intend to leave the meeting.
Thank you very much indeed. Anyone else? Not seeing anyone else.
Councillor Allard's got his hand up, convener.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Allard.
Yes, convener, like the two previous members, I declare an interest to be on the board member of Aberdeen Performing Arts, and like them, I will not require to leave the meeting at that item agenda, because after all, it's an Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee, so nobody should leave.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Any other declarations of interest, or is that as done? I'm not seeing anything else on my screen, so we'll move on. Deputations, there aren't any. The minute of the previous meeting, if I go through it page by page for the meeting of 24th February 21, page 7, anyone got anything? Page 8. Page 9, page 10, page 11, page 12. Oh, Councillor Allard.
Yes, thank you very much, Convener. I had a few questions we were answered by officers by email. Just one I forgot to ask them was regarding page 11, vacant properties available to let to sell. A link was due to be circulated to the committee. I just wanted to make sure that it was.
We got somebody who can take that one. Mr. Booth?
Yeah, probably myself. If I've not done it, I can recirculate that again, convener. I can even probably add it to this meeting chat if that would help people.
If you could, that would be good. Councillor Allard, does that answer your query?
I'm happy with the answer, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And then we've got page 12. Not seeing any questions. Can we agree the minute? I'll take that as an agreement. I'm not seeing anybody. Committee business planner at 6.1. If we go through it page by page, and if anybody's got any questions, if they put their hand up. Page 13. Councillor Many.
Thank you, convener. My question was around the school pupil and security that's delayed. When can we expect a revised date for work to commence on that? That's my question.
Thanks. Can we have? Oh, can we have an officer for that one, please? Somebody able to take it?
I'm happy to answer that one, convener, if helpful.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Shepherd.
You'll appreciate we've had a number of restrictions of access to school buildings, so that really did lead to the delay. But now we're starting to move back down the levels. I would be hopeful that we could start work on that relatively soon.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Councillor Many, does that answer your question? Oh, I seem to have a frozen Councillor Many.
Oh, am I back online? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Shepherd.
Okay. Any other questions on page 13? No. Page 14? Not seeing anything. Page 15? Not seeing anything. Page 16? Not seeing anything. 17? 18? 19? 20? 21? 22? 23? 24? Okay, no more questions on that. So if we move on to 8.1.
Sorry, Convener, Councillor Allard's got his hand
Councillor
up
Allard
again.
again, sorry. Councillor Allard.
Yes, thanks very much, Convener. I needed your advice on this one. It was not on particular pages, but on all the pages, if not. It's regarding the 8 reports we've got in front of us today as per the business planner. In June, we had 9 reports due and 4 delayed, one some already delayed twice, I believe. 11 reports are earmarked for our September meeting, plus 7 we were supposed to have received today, making a grand total of 18, if I'm right. And so we might want to address this now, or maybe I'm in your hands, Convener, if we want to address it later in agenda item 8.2, page 60, appendix E, or agenda, and agenda 8.3, appendix A, page 65, where some of this explanation are there why we are in this situation.
I'm entirely in your hands if you want the answer now. Is there an officer that can take that question?
Through you, Convener. Thank you,
Thank you,
Councillor
Mr. Harvey. Thanks.
Yes, it's not the situation we want to be in, as I'll discuss further, item 8.3. We are making progress, and as things start opening up, as has just been alluded to by Ms. Shepherd, we will be able to move forward a little bit faster. How that impacts on your agenda and your work as well, we obviously need to take consideration of that, and I'll discuss it with the convener, vice convener, and the committee officer in due course. I don't expect you'll be immediately flooded with them, but as I've indicated, we are moving things forward, so there may be opportunities to see more audit reports. Of course, we'll see how that factors into your agenda and discuss that as part of the agenda setting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Harvey. Councillor Allard, have you any comeback on that?
Well, just now I think it's a fine, appropriate answer. It's just trying to highlight the effect of the snowball effect that it has, that it seems that we are getting more and more and more due, which we could maybe address on 8.3 later on, Convener. Thank you for the answer.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Moving on then, 8.1, the Alio Assurance Hub. Mrs. Cuthbert, do you want to introduce the report and then take questions?
Yes, I would. Thanks, conveners. So the Alio Assurance Hub is presenting the first of 2 reports in the current year, setting out the risk ratings for each of the Alios following our most recent round of scrutiny. So as you'll see, we sought assurance in the usual areas of governance, risk and finance based on the agreed work plan. And the specifics of the information we requested are set out on page 26, and the assessment by the Hub is summarised in the appendices from pages 31 onwards. If I may, I'd like to draw attention to just a couple of preliminary points. So in each case, the risk ratings have lowered since the last report. This is partly due to the timing of the last report, when we were still sort of slap bang in the middle of the COVID response. And the landscape for the Alios at that time did carry considerable uncertainty in some areas. We also had a sharper focus at that time on the sort of financial risks, which finance colleagues will speak about shortly. Secondly, in respect of Bon Accord Care, we've noticed that some wording has cut off one of the boxes in Appendix F, so apologies for that. That relates to internal and external audit. So what the words which are missing read as follows: the level of assurance gained in respect of Bon Accord Care's audit activities is high, as programme of auditing is comprehensive, and the 3 lines of defence are well established, and there is visibility on audit recommendations through the board. So apologies for that omission. Thirdly, the Hub has indicated to the committee and to the ALIOs what we'd be looking for in each case to be able to raise those assurance ratings further based on additional controls being in place and the risk rating being lower when we come back to report to you in the next cycle, which is later in the year. If you don't mind, I'd just quite like to quickly summarise the position against each of the categories, since the report to the last meeting didn't go into so much detail, convener, so hopefully that's okay, and I'll just quickly run through that. In respect of governance, we were checking documentation is all up to date or scheduled for review, that delegations are in place for emergency situations, should it not be possible to convene their boards. The risk rating was low or very low for all ALIOs. There will be some follow-ups with Bon Accord Care in relation to the audit of their scheme of governance, which they've recently had, as well as their scheme of delegation, which is due to be reported to their board in May, and some work that they have planned with the improvement service, but it was still a low rating. We sought assurance around the continuity of staff welfare and performance, staff welfare and performance and appraisal during the pandemic. All the risk ratings were very low here, with some really reassuring arrangements in place to look after staff and to ensure that where they were still working and not furloughed, appraisal and performance management continued. So no concerns there. On data protection frameworks, again, all ALIOs continue to provide strong assurance here around policies, procedures, training for staff, etc. Moving on to risk registers were reviewed, including the status of any EU exit-related risks. Again, very low for all ALIOs, with risk registers all in good shape, horizon scanning for new risks taking place, and evidence of this all being completed on a regular schedule. EU exit risks relate exclusively to some types of materials for APA, and they're monitoring that closely. Sorry, I mean Aberdeen Heat and Power. Whereas the workforce elements are more of a risk for Bon Accord Care, but they've provided assurance that that's not presenting any immediate issues. There's evidence from all areas that all ALIOs that COVID risks are being and continue to be well managed. As to internal audit, again, very low for all, with a low risk rating for APA, simply due to them transitioning to new auditors and audits having been suspended during the pandemic year. However, we would look for indicators in the next cycle that this is back on track. Business continuity planning, lots of assurance has come through that plans have been activated successfully during the past year. Lessons have been learned from disruption to business continuity in all cases, but documentation is being updated. And we did get a real sense that business continuity is a live issue for them, but it's being handled appropriately and well. And in light of the sharp focus on the Council's civil contingencies responsibilities, we wanted to understand how the ALIOs could support us with these in future. They're all rated as low rather than very low, but really just because we see some opportunity to work with the ALIOs more so that they can support the Council in its duties as a Category 1 responder. And there's a recommendation to that effect included in the report, as you'll have seen. We have just filled a vacant post of Emergency Planning and Resilience Lead, and one of their early priorities is to schedule specific training with ALIOs. As you'll also have noted from the papers, 2 of the ALIOs have provided us with rest centres over the winter period where required, which is brilliant. And finally, on finance, as I said, the focus of the last report in October was drawn mainly from our scrutiny of the financial position of the ALIOs, as that had been significantly impacted by the pandemic. Financial stewardship continues to be strong in all cases, and there aren't any concerns on process or governance. If I could just highlight an error on my part with an Appendix D where the risk rating reads medium. The overall risk rating for APA is medium due to the strong assurances taken on all the work which APA is doing to maintain strong governance, risk management and financial stewardship. However, the risk on finance specifically remains high, and I'll pass on to finance colleagues to say just a bit more about that just now. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Cuthbert. That was absolutely excellent. Who's coming in from finance? Oh, Mr. Belfer, thank you very much.
Thanks, Convener. Just on that very specific point that was just being advised to you, I think the reason that was sitting as high in relation to APA is partly the existence of a guarantee that we have for them. A council has registered that and approved that as part of its budget for 21-22. So recognising that there's still that vulnerability in the system for them, all based on, I would say, the extent to which the external funding that they would ordinarily, as well as the sports organisations, be in receipt of at this point, with doors open and so on, is very much affected and continues to be affected this year. Clearly there's light at the end of the tunnel, I hope, and from that point of view, that's driven our understanding not only of the action and activity that's taken place over the last year by all of the ALIOs to make sure that the financial resilience of their organisations is addressed, is strengthened, and that every opportunity has been taken in order to protect their balance sheets, if I put it in those terms. And as a result, if we bring that back to the APA position, the overall risk assessment that's actually been given has been lowered down to medium as on the whole risk assessment, rather than just purely the finance one. And I think that's extremely helpful and brings everybody's risk assessment down. There's no doubt there's still challenges ahead, but I think in terms of looking backwards at what the ALIOs have done, we've seen a significant amount of work, and clearly there has been a massive amount of work by the ALIOs themselves in conjunction with us as a council, in order to satisfy us that everything that could be done has been done. And I think from that point of view, we're comfortable with the risk ratings that are being presented in the papers today.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that, Mr. Belford. That was most helpful. Over to the committee for questions. Councillor Duncan, I saw your hand first, and then Councillor Allard.
Thank you very much, Convener. I've got two questions, but it might be better to take them separately because they're two very different points. Okay. The first one, I think first of all I should say I really like how this report has evolved over the last couple of years. I think it's incredibly informative and clear. I wondered if we could have an explanation of the rationale for the split risk assessments on Appendix B. So everyone has got a split assessment apart from APA, which is just medium. There's very low and low in the others, and low medium. And looking through the appendices, I just wondered what the line was, what's the threshold for taking something away from being that straddling very low to low into low, or between, if something was low to medium, what's the point at which you decide, even if only one risk is medium, the whole score becomes medium? Because I think it's not a science. There's absolutely lots of judgment here, but I think it would be really helpful for the committee to understand the thought processes that go into assigning those final scores, please.
Cuthbert, Convener, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think probably in relation to APA, we've finalised that one with medium risk rating, whereas it probably should be a split one on reflection. I think you're right in saying that there's no exact science to it. I think if we look at the sort of risk ratings that we've given in each of the areas for each single one, we kind of just take a feel for, is that mostly very low, or is there a bit of low? It's no exact science. I think you're right. I think I sometimes wonder whether that appendix is particularly helpful, and whether actually you're just better off seeing the ratings against each of the different components in the separate appendices. But we'll reflect on that and have a think about that for next time round, if that's okay.
Yeah, yes, thank you for that. I mean, this is the kind of thing that we need to reflect on all the time, isn't it? I mean, I would imagine that if something came back as a very high financial risk, the whole thing would automatically become very high. So I think it's probably possible to put some more clear guidance in, and that maybe that could come back to the committee. Maybe the committee could consider, just to give you a better steer, a better framework for making your decisions. And also it would help us then when we're reading the report. My second comment is, I was conscious at the beginning that some of the ALIOs were a bit nervous about the ALIO Assurance Hub process. And I know that now that they've got more used to it, there doesn't seem to be problems anymore about you not getting information and all the rest of it. I just wanted to know, have we now tipped up beyond the point where ALIOs are now finding this to be a helpful, constructive process rather than seeing it as a bit of a threat? And is there now an opportunity for ALIOs to start learning from each other's experiences, particularly around the governance piece? Because there's lots of different models of governance and lots of different emphasis on each ALIO. And maybe the hub is a way of our various parts of our group learning from experiences, as well as being subject to assurance and oversight by us.
Thanks for those questions, Councillor Duncan. I think as far as whether we're helpful, we haven't specifically asked them that question, but I certainly get the impression that they're finding it a less onerous process than they have done in previous years. We probably want to be a bit more direct to ask them whether they're finding it helpful. Certainly we've had, I feel as though this last cycle, I think probably due to the work that Jonathan and his team have done, and Craig as well, Craig Innes, working so closely with them over the last year, it feels as though relationships are stronger and they're getting the benefit of that support. So haven't asked them that directly, but I'm happy to do that. As far as them learning from each other, I suppose as the ALIO Assurance Hub, as you'll be aware, is a part of an overall ALIO strategic framework. And Craig Innes holds meetings with the ALIOs on a schedule with all of them together. So there's opportunity there for them to learn from one another. And of course, they do all get copies of the report and they can see each other's submissions as well. But as I mentioned, we're going to be doing training with them all around civil contingencies. So that'll be an opportunity to pull them all together again. So there's another opportunity there for us to do that. So hope that answers your question.
It might be an opportunity to pose the question and maybe feed it back to the committee, when you're next before us, Mrs. Cuthbert. I think that's a really interesting point that Councillor Duncan has raised. I've got Mr. Belford with his hand up. I suspect he might want to come in for part of Councillor Duncan's questions.
I think it was just actually Mrs. Cuthbert has already just picked up on the point I was going to add, which was the strategic meeting that myself, Mr. Bell and Mr. Innes have on a quarterly basis. Well, that was interrupted a little bit in terms of the year of COVID, if we put it like that. But we're very clear amongst ourselves that we want to get that back on track and get that back to a position where we're meeting on a regular basis, and happy to pick up on that particular point and take that onto the agenda if that would be helpful. And as you've said, convener, happy to involve Mrs. Cuthbert in that and allow her to feed back on their views thereafter.
Councillor Duncan, do you want to come back on that?
No, just to say thank you, and I welcome that. I think it's good to find out. It's good to temperature check with the ALIOs how they're finding this process, because we're less likely to get frank information if they're feeling that it's not constructive and helpful. So I think it's good for us to take the temperature check with them and to feedback. Thank you.
If I could just add, sorry, as a final comment there, I'm just reflecting on when we agreed the work plan with them at the end of last year, and they were all very honest in their response to that. And I think we did get we shifted that work plan to take account of their comments. And I suppose that gives me a little bit of comfort that they are responsive to the process. But I think seeking that feedback more directly is a good idea.
Okay. Have you any more questions, Councillor Duncan? Okay, thank you. Over to you, Councillor Allard.
Thank you very much, Convener. Let me comment on the words that Mr. Belfort said early on, that the light is very much at the end of the tunnel, of this COVID tunnel. So we can thank all arm's length organization of the council for the incredible governance and managing the risk the past last year. I hear Mrs. Cuthbert talking about the importance of scanning new Brexit risk, and this is a very important point. And here come my question, because first of all, let me thank officers for separating the Brexit risk from the other risk. That makes it a lot clearer. It makes a lot of sense, particularly by the risk associated with COVID will hopefully disappear before the risk associated with the UK leaving the EU. So that makes a lot of sense. So if you look at page 41 on Bonaco Care Appendix F, the part which talk about Brexit, which is the last paragraph on page 41, I read that Bonaco Care are also actively managing the risk about Brexit, particularly as this relates to workforce planning and mitigation are proving effective. And I hear saying the words, but Bonaco are particularly affected on this planning and effective mitigation, and it's what we want to see. So I would be grateful if someone today could expand on this. And following Councillor Duncan, very good question, the last question she asked, if they are shared across the council, arm's length external organization, the council's integrated joint board, just to make sure that good practice, something which seems to work very well, is very spread across the council and the organization around the council.
Sorry, there was a glitch there. I don't know what happened there. Sorry if I've understood the question correctly. It's about sharing good practice from between the council's ALIOs and the IGB. Is that have I picked that up correctly in relation to management of EU exit risks?
Yes, and particularly on page 41 on the good approach that Bonaco Care seems to have.
That's I don't know if there's anybody from the IGB that would be on the call at the meeting. Yeah, Martin's here, seeing him putting his hand up. He might be able to comment better than me, convener, if that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Yeah, in terms of the strategic risks for the IGB, we do have a workforce planning one. We're also recommending at the next meeting of the IJB that the specific risk on EU exit be considered for removal, but we also have kind of a mechanism in place that any kind of workforce issues relating to the risk would be put into the strategic risk on the IJB's risk register. So I think in short, I'd be happy to look at what Bonaco Care are doing and I can reflect on that and capture that in the strategic risk for the IJB.
Thank you. Councillor Allard, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, may I add the point that Mrs. Cuthbert made regarding scanning new Brexit risk? I think that would be important for all organizations to think not only about closing down the one which we know have been addressed, but scanning for any future ones who are coming. We see them in the news every day that there are new issues who are coming on. So maybe making sure that ALIOs know about this process of scanning it.
Yes, absolutely. I think your point. I take your point, which is that we are we've exited the EU, but the risks don't remain stagnant, and they may continue to develop. So we'll keep an eye on that through the Students Hub and make sure that that's reflected in risk registers and is being effectively managed. Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions for Mrs. Cuthbert or other officers? I'm not seeing any hands. The recommendations are on page 25. We were being asked to note the level of assurance, etc. at 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3. Can we agree the recommendations? I'll take that as agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. 8.2 internal audit. Mr. Harvey, do you wish to introduce the report and take questions?
Thanks, Convener. I'd be delighted. Yes, this is my annual report on internal audits activities during the 2020-21 financial year. In it, I confirm our organisational independence. I note that except to the extent where audits have been appropriately delayed due to COVID-19, there's been no limitation of scope to our activities. And I set out that, in my opinion, reasonable assurance can be placed on the Council's systems of governance, risk management and internal control. In it, I've also noted the outcome of my own review of internal audit compliance with public sector internal audit standards and details of performance against standards that we have set ourselves. Given the results of those reviews, I have also set out a plan to improve our compliance and performance in future years. I should also note that our compliance with public sector internal audit standards is to be audited externally during the current financial year, which will further focus our efforts in improving performance if and where it's identified this is required. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Harvey, please? Councillor Allard.
Yes, thank you very much, Convener. On the question to Mr. Harvey would be on the internal audit quality assurance improvement program resourcing, which we'll find on page 60. And as you heard me, Convener and Mr. Garvey earlier talking about the business planner, showing that the situation is deteriorating and could snowball. Could we have an update on resourcing to address the situation regarding particularly the free recruitments that we have in front of us?
Thank you, Councillor Allard. Through you, Convener. Yes, the Aberdeenshire Council Appointments Committee is sitting today to shortlist candidates for the Chief Internal Auditor post. It's my expectation that they will meet in the next 3 weeks to then undertake interviews. Thereafter, we should have confirmation or otherwise of what's happening with that post. The Senior Auditor post will commence after that. We can't recruit to that until it's officially vacant. We have 2 assistant auditor vacancies at the moment. One is being filled next week. We've already got someone ready to come in. And another is advertised this week, closing next week, and we'll see what we get. I think we should be able to get someone quite good. We're going externally this time, so we're looking for someone with a bit of experience that they can bring to the role. So positive outlook, but it's taken a bit longer to get here than I would have liked, which has had an impact on our ability to progress things and bring them to you as we would have liked.
Thank you very much. Councillor Allard, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I just want to have reassurance that this snowballing effect will stop at one point. Do we think it's going to stop at the end of this year, or do you think we'll still experience some of it in the next few meetings?
Thank you. I can't make any promises at this stage, as much as I would like to. I think that if it comes to it, if you end up with too much on your agenda, as we did at the end of last year, we're actually carrying forward a similar proportion of audits this year as we were last year. It's around the 40% mark. And last year we proposed to summarise some of those audits for you and bring it to you, which we did. And then we were asked to come back with full detail on an additional date. If that's required, we'll have those conversations with all the relevant councillors and officers to see if that's the appropriate way forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I had Councillor Maney's hand.
Yeah, thank you. My question was just answered, Mr. Harvey. It was around what we would be looking at this year, whether we would see improvement or not. But Mr. Allard, Councillor Allard, got in before me. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, have we got any other questions for Mr. Harvey on this paper? I'm not seeing any hands. The recommendations are at page 47, and they were to note the annual report, to note that the Chief Internal Auditor has confirmed the organisational independence of the internal audit, note that there has been no limitation on the scope of internal audit work during 2021, note the outcome of internal audits, self-assessment against the requirements of the public sector internal audit standards, and to note the content of the internal audit's quality assurance and improvement plan. Can we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Thank you. Moving on, 8.3 internal audit progress report. Back to you, Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, this report sets out our progress with planned work, which obviously was reflected in the last paper. You'll see that our 2019-20 work is now fully concluded, but there remains work to be done to conclude the remainder of the 2021 plan. Now, I have included time in the 21-22 plan for concluding this work. As I've just said, resource issues are being addressed through ongoing recruitment exercises. It is going to take a bit of time to recover the capacity. I'm going to throw all the resources we've got at it. Updates will be provided to the committee in due course as we monitor progress and performance throughout the year. What hasn't been highlighted, but you may have noted already, some of the committee dates in your planner have been put back to September. That's in recognition that the next committee is on the 30th of June, and I'll need to have draft papers in the next 3 weeks. So unless I've got the reports out with services ready for comment now, then it's unlikely we're going to get some of those back. So we do have a couple of them out now, which I've reflected in the appendix here. But some of the others may take just a week or two longer, and they will miss those deadlines. So the deadlines as in there, I'm confident of meeting, but that's why some of them are September rather than June.
Okay, if I could take the first question there, then Mr. Harvey, we might have a slightly bigger agenda in September than we would normally have, but really it's just catching up because of the way the diary's falling. Yes. Okay, that's good. Members, any questions for Mr. Harvey on 8.3? I'm not seeing any hands. The recommendations were at page 61, and we were being asked simply to review, discuss and comment. I take it no one's minded to move anything else. We'll agree the paper. Agree, thank you. Moving on, 8.4 internal audit follow-up on agreed recommendations. Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, this presents progress with management implementing agreed actions. There's very positive progress being made with only 27 actions currently reported as overdue. You'll see that there are a number of extensions proposed. Obviously, it's up to services to consider and balance the risks of not addressing the recommendations in line with previously agreed dates and weigh that up against their other risks and priorities. I've given that consideration as part of arriving at my annual opinion, which was presented at item 8.2. Obviously, happy to take any questions. There are a couple of updates to the details we have here. For example, the working time collective agreement on page 88. There's progress being made on that. To date, 5 of the 8 unions have given their agreement, and we're still awaiting a response from another 3. Those have been followed up. The procurement-related activities on page, well, starting on page 80. Commercial and procurement shared service has carried out work to improve processes around annual work plans, but we're keeping the recommendation open until we see some of those work plans filtering through to committees for approval. So the support work has been done. It's just we want to see the conclusion of that before we close it off. And finally, in respect of the telematics on page 91, vehicle usage. Telematics reports have been produced. I've had a heap of them through in the past few days, and we have closed off these actions as a result.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harvey. Councillor Ewell and then Councillor Allard have their hands up.
Thank you, convener. Can I take you to page 80, please, Mr. Harvey, and the two commercial and procurement actions where they both had originally had extensions to the 31st of March this year, and now subsequently looking to June 21. Without wishing to be cynical, is it likely that sometime before June we're going to get another request that these deadlines are extended again, or is June a genuine, I know it sounds terrible, but it's not genuine, realistic is a better word, realistic deadline in each case? I don't know about the rest of the committee, but if something's going to take longer, I don't mind as long as we're told that. But what does annoy slightly is if we're told something's going to be in 3 months, it's not then ready, it's not 6 months, it's 9 months. I'd rather be told initially it's going to take 9 months, and there will very probably be very good reason for that. So are we confident, or are you as confident as you can be, that these actions will be completed by the end of June?
Thank you for the question. For more detail, we do have Millie Mackenzie from procurement on the call. However, as I was indicating in terms of the updates to these actions, the recommendations, we're holding them open to see evidence of the results of the support work that commercial and procurement have put in place. So they've been supporting services to develop all of these plans. What I want to do is see the fruits of their labour, so to speak, to see that they've done all the contracts we expected them to do. They've pulled everything together where it's appropriate and so on. So all the instructions have gone out, which I think was what they originally thought the goal was, but we wanted to be absolutely sure, hang on, how have we fixed this issue? Now, during this financial year, we're going to be supporting our colleagues there to expand and develop on some of these areas, and we're not going to hold them back waiting on that happening. But it's my anticipation that once we see those business plans going up, for procurement work, that we'll be able to close off most of these actions. Perhaps Mel might have more to say on this.
Ms. Mackenzie.
Hi. Yes, Councillor Ewell. I think as Colin's indicated, we had completed all the support work that we'd agreed to in the audit report. And Colin and I had then subsequently agreed that we'd hold open the recommendations so that we could see the procurement work plans coming through. We have received to date quite a number of procurement work plans along with business cases, which are to be reported to SCC in June. So you'll see within that there's a fair amount of business cases will be put up to that committee. So I think in terms of that, I think we will be able to agree the closeout of that recommendation.
Convener, if I may just say thank you for those answers and that reassurance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Allard.
Yeah, I would like to thank officers as well for all the query that I made regarding this report, and I got the answer by email, and that was very helpful. One of them was the one on page 91, and I was delighted to see that the vehicle are now equipped with telematics. The only issue is the same one by Councillor Ewell. If you read in page 91, you see that committee was advised on the 26th of June 2019 that it would be complete in October 2019. Then in December 2019, that we completed in December 2019, and that was all before COVID. And then In February 2020, that will be in March 2020, then in October 20, that will be December 2020, then in December 2020, that will be completed in February 2021, and finally in February 2021, that it will be completed by March 2021. You see where I'm coming, convener. You know, I'm like Councillor Jules. I would love that we would not, you know, use COVID or Brexit or anything else, but we try to avoid having that. And trying to project maybe a bit better or when something will be completed without having that long list. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harvey, do you want to come back at that? Or?
I think that's a very fair comment, and we see this quite regularly. I think we are starting to get better at this. All the services are starting to get better. We are always pushing back to say, are you sure you can do this within this time? Particularly where extensions happen, but also at the end of every audit, before we conclude it and present it to you, we're making sure that officers are comfortable with the dates they provided. There's also in the last year, there's been a new process for following up on the actions and making sure that everyone's aware of what's coming up, so that the deadline isn't when people start looking at these things. I'm sure that hasn't been the case, but there's always a risk of that. In terms of this one, I know it's taken a long time to get there, the fleet one. I think there's been technical issues and issues getting the fleet ready to be upgraded to receive this equipment and so on. We do have the fleet manager here if you're looking for something specific on that. Well, sorry, he's the new fleet manager, so it would have been the previous fleet manager brought it to almost this stage, and then it was concluded last month. Like I say, we will be continuing to recommend to services that they give themselves as much time as they need to do it, and at the same time pushing back if it's a significant or major risk. Then obviously we'd be hoping that these things could be concluded within a shorter time period. But given the scale of some of the risks, that means that it can take longer to address some of the more difficult problems, or the ones which take longer naturally to do. So there's a balance, and I think we're going in the right direction. And I think with the more recent actions that have been agreed, I think you'll see there are fewer updates like this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harvey.
The trend going forward.
I see Mr. Riley's maybe wanting to give us some assurances in around this one, and then I've got the vice convener coming back in.
Yeah, the telematics was quite a challenging project for the service, and there was quite a number of technical difficulties, which met, as well as let's just say trying to in discussions with the unions, that took also a little bit longer. Sorry, that just flickered. I don't know if you lost me then.
No, we're
okay.
Fine.
Fine, okay. Yeah, and there was discussions with the unions, which also took a little bit of time to get them on board with what we were doing. So whilst we had a June 2019 completion, unfortunately, those discussions and the technical issues that we had kept prolonging this particular project, which was most unfortunate. But as I can say now, we have got there. It is all in, and it is now all operating.
Okay, thank you very much for that. The Vice Convener, Councillor Yule, do you want to come back in?
No, apologies, Convener, it's a legacy hand.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Riley. Any other questions for officers on this paper? Not seeing any hands. The recommendations were again to review, discuss and comment, which I think we've actually done quite a bit of in this one. Can we agree that? I'll take this up.
Agree.
Thank you very much. 8.5 HR and payroll systems. Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, here we sought assurance over the Council's core HR system, which includes the Council's payroll and employee management system. Generally, we found it was working quite well. We have highlighted the need to update the associated data protection impact assessment, and we also noted a requirement for some improvements, most of which have already been implemented in respect of access controls, cost monitoring, and manual adjustments to data. Be happy to take any questions on it.
Thank you very much. Questions for Mr. Harvey. Councillor Many.
Thank you, convener. It's just a quick one on page 115, 2.3.1. It mentions that the data protection and information security team highlighted risks that were not fully mitigated at the time. It then goes on to mention the further system development had been undertaken since. It's not, I'm just looking for confirmation that the team are confident the risks have now been mitigated, as it's not entirely clear in that paragraph.
Thanks. I believe that the service is generally happy that those risks have been mitigated, or they can't address them and they're happy to accept them. But undertaking the full data impact assessment will confirm or identify areas where they need to make adjustments as a result. So I think we need to wait until that's been concluded. The original assessment was done 2 years ago, so it's important to keep that up to date.
Okay, I've got Mr. Giacomini, I think, maybe wanting to come in and help us with this one.
Thank you, convener. I can confirm that we're basically on track to complete the revised data protection impact assessment by the end of July. What we're doing is we've got a system upgrade that's coming on place this weekend, actually. So once that's in place, we'll conduct the data protection impact assessment, reviewing the new system update as well.
Thank you for that. Councillor May, do you wish to come back on that?
No, that answers my question. Thanks.
Thanks. Have we got any other questions on 8.5? I'm not seeing any hands. The recommendations at page 109 were to review, discuss and comment on the paper, which I think we've done. So can we agree that?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you very much indeed. 8.6 vehicle usage. Back to you again, Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, convener. So this is our report on vehicle usage. Generally, there are clear procedures covering use of council vehicles and for undertaking licence checks, so driving licence checks for both council vehicles and the grey fleet, as it's known, which is the use of personal vehicles for business purposes. But for those in particular, the grey fleet, reliance is placed on line managers across the council to carry out annual checks. And there's currently no performance figures at a corporate level to give assurance that these are being done. Operations have agreed to look into whether this is feasible and desirable to help provide assurance over that. Telematics, as we've just heard, has now been rolled out. In addition to the data that's going out, services are likely to need training and some guidance on what to do with the results. That's also in development. Daily vehicle checks to make sure that vehicles are safe and appropriate to drive are being recorded, but weren't always being fully completed. Now, in terms of the higher risk vehicles, fleet has mechanisms in place to check and challenge these before they leave depots, but not all vehicles leave depots. So services have been reminded to comply with those requirements and to undertake checks to make sure that those happen. We've also highlighted some delays which have been attributed to COVID in reviewing tachograph infringements with drivers. That is also being addressed. And finally, in respect of vehicles being used for commuting, we've recommended that the business cases be made clearer and more consistent through use of a template so that they can demonstrate continuing justification for the need for that. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, I'm not seeing any hands, but I have a question on the grey fleet that you correctly highlighted. Is that always going to be an area where we would perhaps have a potential risk, regardless really of how good our system is? Because I might forget to MOT my car, or but I've previously shown my supervisor that I have an MOT for the car, but that was maybe some time before. I can envisage there would be difficulties with any system for that. I just wonder what your thoughts are.
Thanks, convener. Absolutely, and it's the amount. It's got to be a balance between the risk that that these things could happen, the risk that something could go wrong, and the level of risk the council is prepared to accept, and of course the amount of work and effort it is to produce a system and update the records and so on. So that's what is going to be reviewed to make sure that it's feasible and proportionate to the risks that are involved in that area.
Thank you very much. Anyone else got any questions for Mr. Harvey on 8.6? Councillor Allard.
Yes, listening to Mr. Harvey on page 131 regarding the recommendation that the fleet should review the content and format of business cases for the use of vehicle out with normal working hours. I wonder if the implemented date of October 2021, and you will laugh, convener, saying that it's maybe a bit too early. I would need some guidance. I know it's about the normal business case on the normal times, but we're still in a COVID recovery time where the use of vehicles will be restricted to some people and trying as much to encourage people not to use different vehicles. So I wonder if October 2021 is maybe a bit early. Can I have some comment on that, please?
Thank you, Councillor Allard. Thank you, convener. Oh, Mark stuck his hand up as well. I think that in terms of reviewing the format of the business cases, that should probably give enough time, but Mark will obviously have his own opinion on that. In terms of rolling it out and making sure that everyone's done it, I suspect that may take a bit longer, and I don't think I'll be expecting that to be the case by October.
Thank you very much. Mr. Riley, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, please, if I may. The business cases are there to show justification of why staff are allowed to take vehicles home as part and parcel of their work. The taking of vehicles home is part of the mobile working that we are doing with key staff with small vehicles. It's not HGV, it is small vans and things that are going home, and they're starting from home and finishing at home. The business cases on this is we're looking at producing a template so we standardize the services business case for justifying vehicles to go home. A good example of this is the building services, where a lot of the staff take vehicles home, and on the back of that, because of mobile working, we have been able to reduce the number of depots that we have been working for over from the last few years and give those up as surplus. Because if we don't take them home, obviously we need somewhere to park the vehicles. So there are advantages there. And it will also linking to some of the other service transformation when we start looking at alternative fuels. So, you know, it's about recharging these vehicles and what can we do. I don't want to go into an overview of what we're thinking at the moment because we don't know what the possibilities are, but there's a whole case there of why we're actually taking vehicles home. So it's standardizing that so people can be satisfied that what we're doing, we've got proper justification of why we're taking vehicles home, and there's proper controls in place so that somebody's not going out to the local shop on a Sunday doing the shopping in the council's vehicle. Thank you, convener.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Allard, do you want to come back on that?
No, very happy with the answers. Thank you very much, Mr. Wright.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm not seeing any more hands. The recommendations were on page 121 again to review, discuss and comment. Can we agree?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Item 8.7, the unaudited accounts for 2020-2021. Mr. Belford, you have appeared on my screen before I managed to say your name. Do you want to take us through the paper, please?
Thanks, convener. I just anticipated you might ask me to introduce the paper. Yeah, absolutely delighted to be able to produce and present to you the draft annual accounts for last financial year. An outstanding piece of logistical work in order to pull all of the strands that are required together, and that's undoubtedly a team event. In terms of doing that, there are many people involved in contributing to this particular document, or these documents as they are, because there's Appendix 1, which is the City Council and its group accounts, and Appendix 2, which is the charitable trusts, which is also brought together. The report itself draws to your attention the process that we will go through going forward, which will involve the audit of the accounts, which KPMG will have already started to undertake in terms of their preparatory work, and I think get going in earnest next week in terms of working towards our next meeting on the 30th of June, when the audited accounts and their report with their opinion we aim to have in front of the committee for that, as we have for the last few years. I would draw to the committee's attention the financial statements, of course, themselves, which are prepared in compliance with all accounting standards and international financial reporting standards, and the local government accounting code. There are supporting statements that accompany that in terms of the management commentary, clearly giving an overview of the year that has gone before us, which is quite an interesting read from my perspective, in terms of just telling the story of how it's affected, how the year has gone, and how we've been affected by the pandemic in particular. The remuneration report is a standard statement, also drawing out attention to remuneration of senior staff and senior councillors. And I'll conclude by mentioning the annual governance statement, convener, which the covering report asks the committee to approve, and this is the opportunity to consider the full extent of the annual governance the governance arrangements the council has in place, obviously underpinned by our certification through SIPFA, but expressed in quite a lot of detail through the report that's through the paper that's included within the draft accounts. That is a reflection of all of the work that has gone on during the year, and the report asks the committee to approve that, while noting a number of other aspects in relation to the process that we'll now go through in terms of the accounts themselves. I'm happy to take questions, and supported by Mrs. Fullerton if those questions are detailed. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Belford. I was going to suggest to the committee if we maybe ask questions on, first of all, the covering report, and then the Appendix A and then Appendix B, to save us having to move through ModGov, which can be quite difficult at times if someone has a detailed question. So can I ask the members if there are any questions on the report itself, the covering report? Not seeing anything. Appendix A. Councillor Allard.
Yeah, my question was on page 149(6) of the report. Are you happy with that, convener?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. First of all, my thanks for all involved in this comprehensive set of reports in a very challenging year. I think it's very challenging to write this kind of reports usually, but with this year it was particularly challenging. I've got one point with two questions, and you wouldn't be surprised, convener, that will be on page 149, which is Brexit. And I read that 5 months in, there is some uncertainty, there are a lot of risk arising from Brexit, and they were anticipated as part of the Council annual credit rating assessment and the supporting report by the Independent Economic Policy Panel, and particularly a barrier to attract workers with the right skills. That was very I like the way it's very clear, putting through, highlighting existing skills gaps, lowering the demand for our export to the EU, limiting the supply of workers in many of our sectors. And we talked about adult social care, which is very interesting, but fish processing, tourism and drinks and energy, and our university of a very challenging time. So my first issue, we would like to understand better one of the phrase which is a bit more vague and maybe requires some explanation, is to try to evaluate the risk, to make them a bit clear, is when it says Brexit is likely to undermine the ability of most parts of the UK to cope with change. So I really looked at the sentence and really tried to evaluate the risk, but I couldn't find where the risk was coming from. If I could have some help on this first question first.
Mr. Belford, are you able to help with that?
Convener, yes, an interesting point. I suppose quite a lot of detail in relation to the exit from the European Union in terms of the risk and the statement there in terms of the overall undermining the ability of most parts of the UK to cope with change. What I would without going into this point, I'm happy to take the point that Councillor Allard's made away. Obviously, consider just what that's actually trying to say, and perhaps try and improve. Sorry, blue lights outside the window, and try and bring some greater clarity to that through the audit process, and just improve on the clarity of that particular sentence for the annual account, the audited accounts, which we'll bring back to you in June. So if you leave that one with me, I'll reconsider that point, if that's okay, Councillor Allard.
That's very helpful, and it reassured me, but I'm not the only one. I was scared, but I was the only one I couldn't grasp what the question said. And my second question is really what I talked about early on. When we looked at the arm's length organization's report, I congratulated the officers to separate very well the risk of Brexit with the risk regarding COVID. And I don't see that in this report. So I wonder if we could maybe modify the draft or see how we could avoid having this risk put together, saying the risk was due to risk of Brexit and COVID, but really separating the two issues, which are very different and will affect the organization in different ways. So for better scrutiny and clarity, would it be possible to try to modify some of these reports and try to separate the two issues, and that will make for more clarity and scrutiny?
Convener, I think certainly take that away as well, and I think actually reflect on what the Alio Hub assurance reports, how they were put together, and see if we can capture that same sense of clarity that Councillor Allard was looking for. But more than happy to take that away as feedback from the committee, and look to see what we can incorporate into the final audited accounts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Belford.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Belford, as well. You know, a very, very lengthy report. Do we have any additional questions on Appendix A? We're still on Appendix A. Not seeing any hands. Appendix B. Does anyone have any questions on Appendix B? Not seeing any hands again. As Mr. Belford pointed out in his presentation, there are a number of recommendations, page 133, 134, 2.1 to 2.7, asking us to undertake a number of issues to be covered off. We're being asked to approve the annual governance statement as included in the Council's unaudited annual accounts for the financial year 2020-21, we're asked to consider a couple of points and to note a number of other points further on. Can we agree the recommendations, please?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Mr. Belford, and thank you very much to Mrs. Fullerton. That's a considerable piece of work that has gone into that report. Thank you very much indeed. That takes us to 8.8, the RIPSA report Q1. I take it, Mrs. Anderson, you would like to perhaps take any questions, or do you wish to comment on the report at all?
No, I don't actually wish to comment on the report. You'll see, Convener, that is quite a brief one this time. There's not been much RIPS and activity, so very happy to take any questions that anybody has on it.
Thank you very much indeed. I have one hand so far, Councillor Allard.
No, it was just to thank the officers for the report. It was quite interesting to know that something was thought of, but then decided not to go ahead, and we still informed about it. And that's, I really want to compliment of officers to inform us of this fact. That's the way it should work, and I'm delighted to see that we didn't have to do more of this in this particular year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Do we have any other questions for Mrs. Anderson? Not seeing anybody.
Convener, if you wouldn't mind, I could just come back to Councillor Allard on that point, and just to highlight to him that if an authorising officer actually refuses an application for covert surveillance, we keep a note of that too in the central record. So demonstrates to the Investigatory Powers Commissioner that there's that level of scrutiny when we say no.
Sorry, given my background, I assume everybody knows that. Sorry. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. If there are no further questions, then we will obviously move to agree the recommendations, which were at page 341, which were simply for noting. Can we agree that?
Agree.
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
I will now ask the clerk I can confirm that the meeting has now concluded and that recording will be stopped, and I would like to thank everyone for their attendance and participation today. Thank you very much.